Hey, I don't get excited about much, but I'm excited about this YESWELDER here. The MIG 205 DS, this is a game changer for me. This thing covers your gas MIG, your flux, your stick, and your TIG all in one machine. Have you priced the multi-processors in the box stores? Those things are ridiculous. Well, YESWELDER Supply Company has made it affordable for you and I to have these multi-processors. So with the kit and the box, you've pretty much got most of everything you need to get started other than a few consumables. Hey, I would ask, if you like what you see, drop us a like. If you've got a question or a comment, hey, drop that down below for others to see. And most of all, if you want to see more on this, hit that follow button. That way you can check out the more options that we cover on this. But for right now, we're going to move into the gas MIG and get this thing set up. So that's what I want to do, is walk you through the unboxing of it, the setup, and glue something together. So let's dive right into this. So obviously you'll receive the MIG welder here, and you get a box of accessories, and you've got a very detailed owner's manual with this, or user's manual on how to set it up, but we're gonna walk through a lot of that today. And you even have this sticker chart that's pretty neat that you can actually stick it to things, but I've got a little secret toward the end on this. So when it comes down to it, one of the things that you will receive will be the gun for the MIG, and this is a 10-foot lead on this, and it's got a very nice feel to it towards the construction, the thickness of the cord. You've got a flexible wand on it that will prevent the pinching of that. As far as the handle, it does seem very user-friendly with that. And this tip here is the same, I believe it's a 5/8. So that right there is a universal, so you can pick it up from YESWELDER, or this is something that is easily to be replaced here. So this unit is set up to run as a 220, and you also have the adapter to drop it down to a 110 volt. And you do have a liner for it that you can replace when you are welding aluminum, so that's something that comes with the kit also. Now when it comes to the grounding clamp, this clamp here, it seems pretty comfortable. It's a good flexible hose on it. The clamp has a pretty good biting force on it, and it has the Euro style plug, just as many of the others do here. Now when it comes to stick welding, it does come with a lead for the stick on that, but it is set up for it, so that's a plus in the right direction. And you also have your hose assembly for your gas connection, and that's your standard fitting as well right there. So it looks like about an 8-foot lead on that one, so that is something else that comes with it. Now you do have a couple of different tips that comes with it, and that's a 0.3, 0.35, 0.45, so it's got different thicknesses and the tool to be able to swap that out. Now the drive wheels, it does come with 3 different drive wheels. It's got the V-knurl groove on it, and one is actually set up as a groove so you can run a softer wire like aluminum or something along those lines. So what we want to do now is get more detailed on this, get things set up, and let's walk to the next step here. Now this right here is a 220 volt at 34 amps, or you have the adapter that you convert it over to the 110, but then that steps up to a 43 amp. So make sure that your wiring, your receptacles, and your circuit breakers are all set up for the correct amperage on that. So in the way that we are running this today is we will be using gas on a 220. So we'll start off by making sure that our plug for the lead is plugged in. You've got this little cover here as a protective cover. And then you've got a couple different prongs here. One is going to be a pilot that you need to make sure that that is in line. Once it's in line, it's firmly seated into the brass valve. Then you would use this wand here to actually tighten it to lock it in place. So that was pretty user-friendly. This lead here is 10 feet long, so you got some space between the torch tip and the box here. Now our next operation is the polarity. So since we are using gas, that we'll take this and plug this into our positive port here and make sure it firmly locks in. Now if you run gasless or flux, you would take this lead and plug it into the negative side of that. And whichever one that you are using, just make sure that the ground then follows back up with the remaining port here. And some ask what this other 2-prong port is. And this is the spot that you would plug in your spool gun, which that is not provided, but YESWELDER does offer it. And their model number for that is LBT 150. So that's something you can pick up at YESWELDER. So as far as our controls here and our leads, they are plugged in. But let's walk through this display here. And as you can see on the display, you've got a nice cover here that's going to protect it from, say, dust or grinding sparks and things along those lines. So it's very user-friendly with that. And when it comes down to the controls on it, you've got your manual MIG, your synergic MIG, your stick, and your lift TIG. And you use a selector here to select between which one that you are using. Now, when it comes to the gas or gasless, you have a selector here that will choose 100% argon, 75-25 flux, or if you're welding aluminum. And then this button here in the center is your wire feed. So with that, you can slow it or speed it up based off of the arrows here. And then you look over here to the far right, you have your wire diameter. And this will run a 0.023 at 0.6 millimeter, a 0.030 at 0.8, a 0.035 at 0.9, and a 0.045 at 1.2 for your thicker gauge metal. And obviously the thinner gauge will be the 0.023. So most commonly, we will be using a 0.030 here. And then you have this function here at the top that has a clear display letting you know your voltage and your amperes that you are running. So this is pretty neat as far as the setup on the front side of it. And we move over to the rear side of it. And this is something that's got a couple of different things. One, it's got the chart on it to let you know, as far as your duty cycle, your gas hookup, your power on off, and also your fan to help improve that duty cycle. So here's one thing that I would like to mention here, if this is visible. Now, when it comes to this chart here, this does talk about your duty cycle. So if we are running a MIG and we're on a 220 volt, we come down to the X and we can run a 60% duty cycle at 205 amps. Now, if we want to extend that duty cycle up to say 100%, the maximum that we can run continuous is 158 amps. And so depending if your range is somewhere in between that amperage for the material thickness, then you would adjust that duty cycle. So 60% basically means 6 minutes out of 10 minutes that you can run this machine, and then the other 4 minutes out of the 10 minutes, it needs its cool down period. And it does have thermal protection built in with that, but if you keep pushing it or 1 or 2 times, it could damage the machine. So follow the duty cycle along with the amperage and the voltage that you're using based off of the function that you're using. So it's a very handy little tool there. All right, so that's going to wrap up part 1 on our YESWELDER MIG 205, our unboxing and walk around. So I want to thank you for sticking it out, and I look forward to part 2 and part 3 of 3. So you can click the link down below to find out more details in the meantime. But as of right now, this YESWELDER, I'm 100% satisfied with the setup on it and what I see on it. So see you on part 2. Hey, welcome back to our YESWELDER MIG 205 DS review. So if you missed the unboxing, please see part 1. Now today our goal is to get the wire fed through this, go over some of the details, and get the gas hooked up. So thank you much for following along, and we'll jump right into this, and we'll have the part 3 of 3 to follow, which is burning something together. So let's jump right into it. So now we can move into the inside of it and what is set up and how we set it up, which this is very typical and very common on many of the other models. You press the lever down. One neat thing about this is it can run the 4-inch spool or the 8-inch spool, and it does have the spindle adapter here, that way you can change in between the two. This one here has a left-handed thread, so you'd hold the clock spring on the back side of that. Left would tighten it, right would loosen it, so it's left-handed threads here. And if you run a smaller spool, you can take this off, remove this, and just use your standard spindle. But since we will be using the 8-inch spool, we will keep this adapter on there, and we're going to pay close of mind to this pilot here in the back to make sure that our spool locks into place with that. And when it comes down to the wire feeding it, basically you have your tension here, and I like to hold this button down here, that way it controls the flop up, so that way it doesn't just keep bouncing off the wall there. So this is another thing. You've got this knob here that went way down in there somewhere. And this little spindle here is where you would actually put your drive wheel at. You'll need to make sure that your drive wheel, your tip, and your wire all match with the thickness of the metal. So today we'll be using the 0.9 drive wheel with the 0.30 tip here. So we can set these aside for the time being. So when we look at the 0.9 drive wheel, the opposite side would carry the 0.8. So the 0.8 would have the smaller groove in it. The 0.9 on the right would have the larger groove. So in this case, we need to make sure that it's oriented correctly for the Woodruff key to slide that into place here, and it slides directly on and firmly seats. Then you just take your little keeper and you screw that into place, and that locks that from backing off on it. So now it's time to install the wire on this. So I'm gonna go grab some wire. So while we're getting this set up here, the tip with this obviously is not to create a bird's nest. So I like to keep a little bit of pressure on the wire and on the spool until I get it firmly set in there and good and tight. So what we want to do is hold this in place so it doesn't try to back off on us. And again, we're on left-handed threads here, so we can get that snugged in. And then you can adjust this as far as the tension on the spool itself. But one thing in addition to that is to make sure that we've got a good clean tip cut on it. That way we don't have a catch or a burr that actually, holds us up here. So we're just gonna back this up, slide this into this liner that's got a spring on it, keep control of it. And a very important note, we wanna make sure it stays unplugged anytime that we're inside this box here. So we're gonna just keep feeding that through there, making sure that we are running on this little wheel here in that back slot. And then we need to feed it directly into this liner here, into the spool gun. And somehow that went right in there. So now that we're back inside the liner of the gun, we can lay this flap here down, raise the spring-loaded tension, and then to make sure that we have enough tension on it so it's not going to pull out or unspool. Likewise, we just want to do a little rub test here and there. All in all, I think we're just about set up at this point. We just need to get some gas to the back of it, get some power to it, and I think we're ready to start. And for normal operation, we'd actually close this, but in this case, we want to leave this open so we can inspect this here and you guys can get a close view of what's actually happening here. And before we actually get too far into it, we're going to go ahead and remove this nozzle and the tip. That way we won't have any resistance or catching up here. And likewise, to make sure that this tip matches our wire size. So we'll go ahead and get this tip removed and we'll get power to it and get this to start feeding through. And one other tip is I like to make sure that this wand stays as straight as possible. That way it does not have any binding. And this is the provided tool. So you find the correct one and let's remove that tip there, get it out of the way so we don't have any burrs on it. Another note to mention, if you're switching between 110 and 220, it calls for a 2-minute rest while switching from those two voltages there. Give the machine time to reset. So we've got our lead wrapped all the way around it so that way there's no binding. It's a smooth transition all the way around. So what we need to do now is go ahead and get some power to this bad boy, and it's just a matter of a flip of a switch. And again, since we have power here, we're not going to touch anything in here because that's technically a live circuit. So now we just press the spool gun and wait for the wire to come out and monitor it here to make sure everything's acting as it should. Oh, there she is. So clean. It's not skipping, it's not jumping, it's not slipping. So I feel that we've got a pretty good tension on our wire here. Another backup test is holding this wire here, pressing the button and seeing if you would see any slippage or if it's too tight. So all in all, I cannot stop that wire. So that's a good tension on that wire and it's not dragging or slipping here. So that's a pretty good balance. So what we'll do now is we'll get rid of our excess here, get our tip back on it. Tighten that bad boy back up. And once we find the nozzle, we can put the nozzle back on. So now I'm sure you can see why I was so excited about this. This bad boy is sweet. So what we need to do now is get this set up on the cart. So we gotta get that Lincoln 135 off the cart, put this bad boy on, put the gas back to it, ground it, check our wire feed, speed, thickness, amperage, voltage, all those details, and start gluing something. So let's get this. All right, Mr. Lincoln, it's time to go into retirement. That's because the new kid is in town. The YESWELDER 205 DS. Shoot ya. This is super exciting here. So far as connecting the gas, this is pretty easy to install. Basically, you thread it in, and there's probably even a different choice of tool here, but it's convenient, and it's jimmy rigged. So one other thing I would like to mention that I missed earlier is the selector on the inside, and this is basically an on-off depending on if you're running the MIG gun or if you're running a spool gun. So since we're running the MIG, we're going to turn that selector off, and our machine is set up other than the dial indicators on the front side of it. So we've got our gas hooked up, and this is designed to run at 20 to 35 cubic feet per hour. So again, on our plug-in, we're running the 220 today for the lower amperage, and this is a round ground and the 2 straight plugs here. So we'll get that plugged in, turn our gas on, power it up, and we're ready to get started. So here are the numbers that we need to set up our machine. And basically we found those numbers from the welder settings chart. So we started with the carbon steel, found out that we were running with a solid wire, 75-25, and then we needed to find out that we are using a 1/8 inch plate. So then we would come to the top of it here and locate our 1/8 inch plate. Once we've got that number, now we drop down to where that intersects with the 75-25, and that puts us at 133 amps and 19 volts. So it's a super easy to read chart. So you can take these numbers here, plug them onto the box, and we're ready to start gluing something. So let's get this bad boy turned on here. That's a pretty nice display on it. I'm digging that. So we may have to play with the settings on this a little bit just to get it dialed in. And with that, so far we've got it set up to our MIG setting with 75-25. It's running around 21 volts here, so we got it pretty warm. So I'm digging it, Jimmy. The YESWELDER 205 DS, this thing is the way to go. And when I compare this to the Lincoln 135, hey, this right here, it gets a lot hotter, it's a lot smoother, and it's even a lot more user-friendly. And to know that it's a multi-processor and have all the other different functions with it, like the lift TIG and the stick, hey, this right here to me is my go-to, and you can see which one's on the cart now. Hey, but if you know a friend or family that'll benefit from this, you know, finding a multi-processor with all these different functions on it for less than 400 bucks, hey, this right here, knowledge is power. At least let them know and make their own decision with this. But in the meantime, but yeah, you can put this bad boy in your cart for right now. Think about it, kick it around, look at the reviews on it. But at the end of the day, to me, this is a game changer. I'm super satisfied with it, and I am a YESWELDER.